For some PathOfExile discussion. Today we are going to be talking about potential changes that we're going to want to look for in the patch 3.23 patch notes. So they're going to be coming out when this stream is about 12 or 13 hours old. At least that's what we're expecting. It is not guaranteed that they'll be on time. That is when we're expecting they'll be released. Now, this could always change, so we will find more out later. Now, first thing I wanted to discuss though is that there have been a couple of changes to the way that YouTube runs its streams. So, YouTube has changed the way stream ads work. I'm testing a new setting here, and if ads are infuriating while this is live, please do let me know. If an ad does make you fall behind, then you should be able to jump to 125% of base video speed until you're caught up. At least that's the way I think it works. But what I want to do is get any of the teething problems with YouTube's new streaming settings out of the way now, before we get to the main live stream tomorrow. Hopefully everything goes smoothly, but it probably won't. This is the first time with the new settings after all. No, we will not be streaming for the whole 12 hours. Oh my god, that would be absolutely nuts. No, it is currently 8 PM my local, and I'm going to be up at 5 or 6 in the morning in order to watch the earlier stream that's happening on the PC Gamer Chat. So for that reason, then I've got a really busy day. Like tomorrow is actually, for most PathOfExile enthusiasts, the busiest day of the league is actually the league start day. For content creators, it is patch notes day. And we're expecting patch notes tomorrow, although that's not promised. So I want to discuss a few things that may or may not get nerfed in patch 3.23. But I want to just start by noting that Mageblood is completely broken and is probably immune to the nerf bat. Grinding Gear Games don't seem willing to touch this one. They don't seem willing to touch Headhunter. They know that Mageblood and Headhunter are miles better than the other tier 0 rarity uniques, and they are quite content to leave it that way. I expect that that's going to remain the case, but Grinding Gear Games will be the ones that know that. So I'm working under the assumption that Mageblood won't be nerfed. Personally, if I was in charge of PathOfExile, Mageblood's 2 to 4 utility flasks roll would be changed to a set 3, which would be a nerf to the item but would still leave it the best belt in the game. In fact, it would be the best item in the game still, and it would mean that there'd be more variance in unique flasks that people use. However, that's something that I will say and that other people won't necessarily agree with, which is fine. Next thing I wanted to discuss is something that will ultimately have a big effect on a number of other changes throughout the league. There is a problem in PathOfExile where monsters have too much of a particular stat. That stat is physical overwhelm. So this is the capacity for monsters to disregard some of your armor, disregard your armor rating. Essentially, if your armor says that you take 67% less damage from an attack, but a monster has 12% phys overwhelm, you take 55% less damage from an attack. That is fine. When it's 12%, that's fine. When it is 30%, that's a lot more problematic. And there are a whole bunch of monsters in 3.22, and I'm wondering if this will influence the design of 3.23 or not, that had monstrously higher numbers. 3.22.0, the Goliaths of Night in the Ancestor Trials had 50% phys overwhelm. By 3.22.1, this was still 30%. And ultimately, these monsters were one-shotting me on a character that could easily face tank a Shaper Slam. I could probably have face tanked an Uber Shaper Slam as well. I might have died to an Uber Shaper Slam critical strike, but I would have survived a non-crit from the Uber Shaper or a critical strike from the normal Shaper, and yet against these Goliaths of Night at only Ancestor difficulty 400, I was being one-shot by that. Now, this is a problem that causes a number of cascading things because it causes players to be overly reliant on the one thing that gets around this issue. And that one thing that gets around this issue is Taste of Hate and other similar items that scale the same defense. Physical damage suffered as an alternate element instead. So I think we might see an overhaul here, but the key underlying problem is that monsters have too much physical overwhelm, which makes armor unreliable, it makes physical damage rating on gear unreliable, and it makes endurance charges unreliable. You need to find something else, even if it's just a little bit of something else to take the edge off the hits that have got a lot of overwhelm. And that's one of the biggest issues, I think, in balance in the game at the moment. If Grinding Gear Games were to address some of the monsters that have extreme outlier physical overwhelm numbers, then at that point, they could dial down the numbers on Taste of Hate, on Lightning Coil, on Cloak of Flame, and it wouldn't have cascading bad effects to the game. If physical overwhelm numbers stay the same as they are in patch 3.23, then I think we're going to be in a situation where pretty much everyone is going to be running a Taste of Hate setup if they can. So that's basically the main issue that I think is there in terms of underlying systems that are broken at the moment in PathOfExile, although there's going to be a few other issues as well. Let's talk about another issue, one that I've added to these notes pretty late, and so they don't have some nice shiny setup for them. But let's talk about Sanctum here. Sanctum caused massive inflation when it returned in 3.22. So it was originally the league mechanic of 3.20. It was a really popular league mechanic. Players loved it. It came back, but it drops a lot of raw currency. One of the things that happens in PathOfExile is that sometimes a league mechanic drops items that are exclusive to that mechanic, and if the market doesn't oversaturate with those items, then you have this dynamic where the better that mechanic is perceived as being, the more lucrative it is, the less lucrative it becomes to run. This is definitely the case with Blight Ravaged maps. Blight Ravaged maps are the only source of Stranglegasp, or at least the only one that matters. And so players who want to get their hands on this item, they have to run Blight Ravaged maps or trade with people who do. But the more lucrative that Blight Ravaged maps become, the more people start shifting into them. With Sanctum though, Sanctum's primary loot is Divine Orbs. That's the primary thing that it drops. Its secondary thing that it drops is Mirrors of Kalandra. And the tertiary thing that it drops is the relic that's needed in order to attempt an original Sin run. Of these three things, it's only the least important of them that is Sanctum exclusive. And that's the issue with Sanctum. My personal opinion is that Sanctum could do with 35% less loot, and that's only the Divine Orbs and the Mirrors. The rest doesn't matter. And then 35% or 40% lower drop rate of the Sanctum Tomes. If this is done, then getting a Sanctum Tome is going to be exciting because even though it provides less loot, there's going to be more of a shortage of them, and you'll start seeing some of the Sanctum exclusive stuff going up in value. And the key thing that happens when Sanctum gives too much raw currency, it causes things that Sanctum can't drop that are short supplied across the trade league economy to become very, very, very expensive. Mageblood, Apothecary, way more expensive this league, and Sanctum is the core reason for that. Now, Sanctum does help in solo self-found. There are people saying that in chat, and I definitely agree with that. If you're a solo self-found player, Sanctum providing a reasonably reliable source of raw Divine Orbs that you can use in crafting is a net upgrade to solo self-found play. The problem is that the game is balanced around the non-hard modes. So for instance, changes that benefit solo self-found at the expense of the core game, changes that benefit Ruthless at the expense of the core game, changes that benefit Hardcore at the expense of softcore, all of these are generally anathema to grinding your games' normal design principles. For that reason, I am thinking that Sanctum probably needs a fair amount of a nerf. There's a bunch of ways this could be done, like Trax in chat is saying that removing the duplication relic would solve the problem. That may even be the case. That is something that exacerbates things, but it is the case that I think in general Sanctum could do with however they specifically do it. I think it could do with giving a third less basic currency, and it could do with the tomes for access to it being about a third less common than they are now. For what it's worth, Sanctum tomes are quite a bit more common than Heist blueprints. This information can be data mined. They're 62.5% more common than Heist blueprints are if you don't have a Heist Atlas. Now, if you have a Heist Atlas, the Heist blueprint chance obviously goes up quite a lot. But that's my thoughts on Sanctum. I think Sanctum is going to get nerfed. I don't think grinding your games are going to wait another league because I don't think they really want to see another league where Mageblood is 300 plus divines the entire league. And if Sanctum's not nerfed, then Mageblood will be 300 plus divines. In fact, it might even be 400 this league because more people know how good Sanctum is. People are asking when the patch notes are coming out. We expect them in about 13 hours. This is not guaranteed, but that's when we're expecting to see them. Someone is also asking, do we know with absolute certainty whether Spell Cascades changes? The changed interaction between Spell Cascade, Vixen's Entrapment, Curses, and Impending Doom, that is definitely scheduled to be in 3.23 unless grinding your games have changed their mind and not told anyone about it. So Yehor, I'm not talking about decreasing it by a factor of 3. I'm talking about decreasing it by a factor of 1.5. So instead of getting 100% rewards, you get 65% of current rewards, give or take. That's the plan. 1/3, not dividing by 3. That would be way too much. Okay, so the next thing that's come up is the Relicash boots. The discharge interaction. Unfortunately, the way that I've set up my notes on this, the image of the unique is broken, and I can't fix that while I'm streaming. But Relicash's Impatience is something you can check out on the PathOfExile wiki if you're not familiar with the item. But the way the wording on these items is maximum endurance charges minimum endurance charges equal to your maximum while you're stationary, and the same for the other two charge types. You lose all your charges when you move. With the Relicash boots, if you cast Discharge, while Relicash's Impatience is causing your minimum endurance charges to equal 3, your minimum frenzy to equal 3, and your minimum power to equal 3. If you cast Discharge normally, while you've got a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 3 on all your stats, you will get a 0 discharge. However, if you've got Relicash's Impatience equipped and no other sources of minimum charges, then Relicash's Impatience Discharge will drop your current charges down to 0, then they'll instantly flicker back to full. This interaction is probably not intended, and it's something I think might well get changed, but Grinding Gear Games know whether it's intended or not. They'll know whether it's going to get changed. We'll find that out tomorrow. I wouldn't be surprised either way. It might be something they've overlooked. Might even be something that they've decided not to change. Something I wanted to quickly do is go through the changes that were made to support gems. All the support gems that were added in patch 3.22. So these were my thoughts on it. I've copied across thoughts from day 15 analysis of the solo self-found meta. But Control Blaze is a complete miss. Corrupting Cry is seeing some use. It's not particularly popular. Trauma support is really good on Glacial Hammer builds, and it's definitely seeing some use there with Frost Breath and with Heat Shiver. Volatility is less popular in solo self-found than trade, but is definitely seeing use. Flamewood is a miss. I tried it, 1 second is too long, but it does have a niche use case. That niche use case is in conjunction with very specialized bossing characters, and they can be made to work. Guardian's Blessing is okay in trade without being great, and quite bad in solo self-found. From the green gems, Returning Projectiles is really, really strong. Now, Returning Projectiles has a probably broken interaction with poison. Returning Projectiles should have a reduced... Well, let me correct that. Returning Projectiles would be expected by most players to have reduced effective poisons on the return strike. It does not have this text at the moment. It wouldn't surprise me to see it added. In any case, Returning Projectiles has been a popular support gem and would continue to be if its busted interaction with poison was removed. Currently, against a stationary opponent, Returning Projectiles is 100% more multiplier to poison damage, which is crazy, and it's a reasonably solid gem on pretty much every hit-based build as well. Sadism support is a complete failure, and Locust Mine is a complete failure as well. Locust Mine has the numbers to be good, but Artillery Ballista is too good for Locust Mine to shine. Basically, Locust Mine and Artillery Ballista compete, and Artillery Ballista is less clunky, and both of them are extremely good in terms of damage. Okay, let's just quickly go through all of the other things that we've got here. Now we'll have a look at the blue gems that are here. We have the Frigid Bond is a complete miss. It saw a tiny bit of use in solo self-found where people were linking to their own minions, but I do think that was mostly a meme build. Fresh Meat support has been used on exactly one build, Skeleton Mage Necromancer. As well as that, it's been used a little bit in solo self-found only on Val Animate Weapon characters, but it's not really popular. Sacrifice support hasn't found a home yet, but I still think Sacrifice support is good enough to be used. Devour support is complete and utter garbage. Spellblade support is being used primarily on the Vixen's Entrapment Impending Doom builds that are going to get nerfed in patch 3.23, unless Grinding Gear Games have changed their mind about that interaction. And finally, this is what the Ascendancy spread looked like in solo self-found. You'll see here that we've got a piece of pie that makes up the 7 least popular uniques. I think it's 7. Yes, it is indeed 7. And the Deadeye is the most... the Deadeye is the closest thing to a dominant Ascendancy that we've got. It is number 1 in trade. It is number 1 in solo self-found. It's only number 1 by a little bit in trade. It's only number 1 by a little bit in solo self-found. In trade, when we get there, it's going to be much more dominant, especially the later that the league progresses. So this is day 15 solo self-found. These are just my notes from a video that I did on day 15 of the meta, but this is going to be even more pronounced the later that you get. The new Ascendancies, neither the Guardian nor the Chieftain has really shown brightly, but both have found niches. Guardian is the best Ascendancy in Ruthless. Guardian is getting gutted in Ruthless. I don't think there's any question about that. The small number of people who play Ruthless really want to see Guardian gutted because it's something like 50% of the meta over there. It's a solid performer in other hard modes, and it's kind of okay in softcore trade. Chieftains started to pick up a bit later on once people realised that Hinekora Death's Fury, the explosion node, is better than people gave it credit for. Now, there has been a little bit of an uptick. I predicted on day 15 of the Trade League that there would be an uptick, and that was correct, but it's something that hasn't been huge. Guardian is a middle performer, Chieftain is a slightly below average performer, but both of the new Ascendancies were fine. And now we've got we have the image that will show you just how completely off the chart it was when we have a look at the softcore trade day 10 setup. Here you've got blue is a Deadeye, then it's a Pathfinder, Saboteur, Inquisitor, Ascendant, Elementalist, Necromancer, Occultist, Champion, Juggernaut, Hierophant, Trickster, and then other. Really noticeable here, I think, that the Deadeye is just hegemonic almost. There are just a huge number of them, and this only increased as the league became more mature. I absolutely expect that we will see nerfs to the Deadeye Ascendancy in this league. If we don't, then we're going to be starting with one of the more solved metas that we've started with. Impending Doom, we had a quick discussion of this. Unfortunately, again, because of the way that I've set up the image on screen, in fact, I can just quickly remove that maybe. Oops, that's not the one we want to remove. That is. Vixen's Entrapment in Impending Doom. This interaction is being nerfed. This is something Gladiator Games have committed that they are going to fix in patch 3.23. It's the way players expect it to work is the way that it works in 3.22. But they have given advance notice that that is not the way Grinding Gear Games expect it to work. Anyways, that is going to be the situation there on Impending Doom. That's it in terms of the notes that I'd set up on the presentation there. The next thing I wanted to do is go through a few things over on the PathOfExile wiki that I think are going to have they're going to be impacted a bit by the patch notes in various ways. Starting with something that is not really a power item, and this is going to be the Voidborn Reliquary. The Voidborn Reliquary key is tied to the highest of the 2023 core supporter packs. Now, the Voidborn Reliquary may get withdrawn from sale tomorrow. Well, when I say tomorrow, I mean tomorrow my time, because 12 hours from now is tomorrow for me in Australia. But if you're in the United States, then that's actually today. It may get withdrawn from sale, the ability to add an item to the Voidborn Reliquary key. The first thing that that's going to mean is that the Voidborn Reliquary will start getting locked down pretty soon. The second thing is that it will be possible to start completing this list on the PathOfExile wiki, which I'll put a link to in chat. Let's do that quickly now. This is a list of all of the foil items in the Voidborn Reliquary key. A couple of fun facts in here. If you have a look for a search, Control F search for Toucan, Sakawal's Nest, someone has a Verdant Sakawal's Nest that when you pull that out of the Void key, it will say Le Toucan has arrived. Astramentus, there is a Sunset foil Astramentus that will say Le Toucan has arrived. The Gull, there is a Sunset Gull that says Le Toucan has arrived and appropriately praises said Toucan. And Wilman's Requital, someone has decided to say, make Le Toucan great again, #praise. So there's a bunch of commentary related to Toucans in there, but if you're interested in contributing to this crowdsourced attempt to solve the Voidborn Reliquary, this would be much appreciated. The PathOfExile wiki team would like your contributions, and that information is something you can find there. And yeah, a lot of submissions won't be there. Like if you put a reasonably uncommon item in, then it's not going to be present, especially if you put something genuinely rare. Things that are like tier 4, tier 5 rarity uniques, they'll get found pretty quickly and they'll end up on this. But if you've got a tier 2, tier 3, or especially a tier 1 or tier 0 item, then screenshots of your particular quote are going to be a while to be found. So yeah, that'll be something that we'll find. All right, let's start with the Divination card that I think is most likely to get moved. The reason I say this is that there's a lot of grumbling around veteran players that they are sick of Crimson Temple and they are sick of Defiled Cathedral. But the way that the current setup is with PathOfExile's Atlas and Divination cards and the like, these two maps are head and shoulders better than everything else. Even with Burial Chambers picking up new Divination card in this league that's just passed, Burial Chambers hasn't been on the Atlas, but it gained the Fortunate in addition to always having the Doctor. Even with Burial Chambers getting that huge buff, the two maps that have 7 years bad luck, which also have the Apothecary, which is the more important one, are just head and shoulders above everything else. This remains the case unless and until Grinding Gear Games decide either to nerf Mageblood, or they decide to give 7 years bad luck a new drop location. I would not be surprised at all to see Basilica gain 7 years bad luck, and both Defiled Cathedral and the Crimson Temple get removed from the Atlas for a league. The reason I think this might happen is that players who have been doing any sort of magic finding are by and large just sick to death of the Crimson Prison. And if Crimson Temple is off the Atlas, it becomes Defiled Cathedral Prison. Those are the two maps that are just so much better than everything else. If 7 years bad luck gets moved, it will still be the case that Crimson Temple, Defiled Cathedral, Haunted Mansion, and Crimson Township will be the best maps in the game. But they won't be head and shoulders above Burial Chambers. And so people who want variance can go, all right, I'm going to take the 15% less loot and go Burial Chambers, rather than, oh, if I go Burial Chambers, it's 45% less loot, and if I go any other map in the game, it's way worse again. So, if there are changes to Divination cards, yes, they will be in the patch notes. The thing to look for here is 7 years bad luck has been added to the Basilica map. That is a text that I think has a reasonable chance of appearing that looks like a straight buff, but is actually a hidden nerf, because it will then be accompanied by removal of the two maps in question from the Atlas. But that's speculation. I don't know that that's going to be the case. Second thing that I think might get nerfed, and we'll get to things that I think will not get nerfed as well, like things that might get buffed, but Speaker of the Dead. Speaker of the Dead is something that I want to raise here. Coda is asking, are the changes out yet? No, we're expecting in 13 or 14 hours from the time that I'm recording this. So this is basically pre-patch notes speculation. The real patch notes and analysis and discussion, that'll come later. The live stream announcement is in 11 hours and 6 minutes, but then we likely get the patch notes right at the very end of that, which might be another 75 minutes. So, what's the deal with Speaker of the Dead? Casual use of this Keystone will indicate that it's bad. If you play around with this Keystone and you're not experienced and you're not trying to min-max it, then this is just a poor value node. What it does is it causes Tormented Spirits to lose the ability to go into rare monsters and unique monsters, but instead they can possess players. Once they possess a player, you as the player can then spread this love to other monsters. You get a combat buff, and this combat buff is neither here nor there. It's really inconsequential. The main reason you do this is because the next 50 monsters that you make bodily contact with on your character, those monsters will gain the touched by whatever ghost is embodying you at that time. That touched effect provides a substantial boost to increased item quantity from that monster. So if you then turn around and slay those 50 monsters, you're going to get roughly the loot of maybe 4 or 5 additional blue packs. This is for every single ghost that you come across. And what it's meant is that the new best way to magic find in maps is to make optimal use of Speaker of the Dead. Most people I speak to who do magic finding see this as a chore. And this, I think, is a problem. When the best way to progress your character is by engaging with a chore that you don't enjoy, then this ends up making the game as a whole less fun. This is the reason I wouldn't be surprised to see reduction in the amount of quantity that's granted by being touched by a Tormented Spirit, but we will see that. And as you're seeing sort of in chat, like there's a lot of disagreement here. So you've got Fate saying do people really want Ghost nerfed? And then at the same time, we've got Glorious Toast saying, as fantastic as this was for group play, I'd like to see it replaced by Sentinel. Andrew Holcomb saying, it sucks that you have to run this to be optimal, and so on and so forth. People are saying that the chat has fallen behind on screen, and it has indeed fallen a bit behind. I don't know that I can fix that. I'm just going to leave it there because I think it will improve slowly over time. I think it might be behind, but at the very least it means that people who are watching this after the fact can see something. So, an interesting idea there that someone's mentioned is removing it from the Atlas and putting it on a belt. I like the mechanic in theory, I just think that it's probably a bit too strong. And at high investment, it starts to become mandatory. The existence of Speaker of the Dead, for example, increases the cost substantially of a Winged Divination Scarab. Winged Divination Scarabs would be much cheaper if Speaker of the Dead didn't exist. There's all of these sorts of flow-on effects. Anyways, I'm not absolutely certain that this is going to get nerfed. I just wanted to raise it as something that's reasonably likely and something that's worth doing a Control F search for when the patch notes come out. Next, we have the Gladiator Ascendancy. Grinding Games have been overhauling 2 Ascendancies a league for a while now, and most of these overhauls have been either a hit or have been like a step forward. Like the Chieftain has gone from being very little played to modestly played, but at least it's the best at a couple of things. So the Chieftain has improved from not very good to okay, whereas the Trickster went from being terrible to being quite good. Not necessarily the best at everything, but second or third best at pretty much everything, and just a compelling ascendancy to try. The Gladiator is something that has no real place in the game at the moment. It did actually get better in patch 3.22, not because of a direct buff, but an indirect buff because volatility support was added, but that wasn't enough to make Gladiator into something better. So that is something that is worth your while keeping an eye on. I wouldn't be surprised to see Gladiator get a massive, massive, massive overhaul, and we'll see exactly what happens there. In terms of a couple of comments in chat, someone's saying that they wish for Grinding Gear Games to bring console game performance up to the level of PC. I think that'd be fantastic. I think it's probably difficult. Having had some technical issues during this league, my GPU died during this league. Here is the poor thing that passed away 27 months, or so 3 months after the warranty ended on it. But I was playing without a GPU for a period, and that's sort of an experience of what PathOfExile looks like on a low-end system now. Okay, now I've got a GPU again, but it really did give a bit of a sense as to just how bad performance is on low-end hardware. Consoles are generally mass-produced to be affordable, and that means that they can't have as much processing power as a dedicated gaming PC. I would like to find, for Grinding Gear Games to find the right balance there, but I do think it's going to be tough because true endgame in PathOfExile, the amount of craziness that is on the screen, it is definitely not an easy problem to solve to get it so that everything works well. And yeah, a whole bunch of Fs on the poor 3080. Yeah, I wish it had failed 4 months earlier, let's put it that way. Then if it had failed 4 months earlier, things would have been much better. And it also took out my PSU at the same time. Anyway, we were talking about Gladiators before we got sidetracked there. The Gladiator is in a bad spot. It needs a lot of help, and I think it's something that probably can't be fixed with numerical buffs alone. The other Ascendancy I'm going to mention is the Assassin, and I do think the Assassin could be fixed with numerical buffs alone. It's something that, honestly, if the nerfs were made to it a while ago when it lost its movement speed were averted, I think it would have a use. As it is, the Assassin is too focused on offense and not enough better at offense than the Trickster is, whereas the Trickster has a bunch of other things going for it as well. The Trickster is an excellent all-rounder. The Assassin is like Trickster plus 10% for damage, but it doesn't have all of the additional benefits that a Trickster's got. Most builds that might consider being an Assassin are better just rolling as a Trickster, and that's an issue that can be solved with numbers. So, It's interesting, yeah, looking at the sort of changes that have happened with the with people's technical issues this league. My technical issues, other than the GPU, and in fact the GPU crashed when I was playing another game, but other than the GPU fail, everything has been working really smoothly for me. For a lot of other players, it's been exactly the opposite. So all sorts of things there. I do like there's someone saying they started Seismic Trap Assassin, they're happy with the performance, they want to see a buff to it. That would be an example of a skill that might get better if Grinding Gear Games were to decide that they wanted to buff the Assassin. Alright, next thing to talk about is unique items that I think might be in the firing line. So, I'm going to talk about the 3 unique items that I've seen the most online discussion about the potential of nerfing. 2 of these I'm okay with being nerfed, 1 of them I am vehemently opposed to. So let's start with Taste of Hate. As long as Grinding Gear Games solve some of the issues I was talking about with Fizz Overwhelm, I am fine if they decide to change the physical damage suffered as cold down to a flat 10%, or if they were to change it so that it wasn't able to be scaled by modifiers that increase flask effect. Any of these sorts of things, Taste of Hate nerf would be something I could live with. If they don't address the underlying problem then of physical overwhelm numbers on monsters being too high, then any nerf to Taste of Hate is going to be a net negative to fun, because it's going to be a net power. It'll make the few builds that are capable of solving the problem of Fizz Overwhelm worse. So really, this is one of those things where I could see this item being nerfed. It's massively outperforming your expectations based on it being a tier 2 rarity unique, but this is one that is sort of a dangerous item. If Grinding Gear Games touch this and don't fix the real problem, then things are going to get worse. Now, let's talk about Heat Shiver, because everyone in chat is talking about Heat Shiver, although that's something that hasn't shown up on the window capture for the chat, which seems to be miles behind. But in terms of Heat Shiver, if Heat Shiver is nerfed, I think it will be a net negative to build diversity. Heat Shiver is an overpowered item. I don't think there's any question about that. Heat Shiver is one of the single biggest increases to DPS that characters can get, and it comes on an item that, whilst doesn't provide any meaningful defenses, it does have other stats you need. You've got to get your resistances somewhere. So Heat Shiver is overpowered. There is no question on that. The problem with Heat Shiver, though, with nerfing Heat Shiver, is that Heat Shiver is one of those builds that, one of those items that it is the only reason people are playing cold damage at the moment. So if you were to remove Heat Shiver, it's not like people who are currently playing Ice Trap would continue playing Ice Trap and would just do less damage with it. Instead, they would just play a different trap instead. And it's already the case that the best bow build is Lightning Arrow. There's a small number of people who are playing Ice Shot because they like Heat Shiver so much, and those players are using Heat Shiver. Every single one of them is using Heat Shiver. But if Heat Shiver gets nerfed, those players just go to join Lightning Arrow. And that's going to be the problem, I think, with anything that nerfs Heat Shiver. Currently, there is one build that is a ranged attack build that uses Heat Shiver, and that is Ice Shot. It's underperforming. There is one build that is a melee attack build that uses Heat Shiver. That is Glacial Hammer, and that is a middling performer. Remove Heat Shiver, and that build is dead. Then there's a couple of spell-based builds. There's Ice Trap, which is overperforming. That's a separate issue. We'll come to that in a sec. And we have the Eye of Winter builds. Eye of Winter builds, if Heat Shiver's nerfed, they are gone. They just don't exist anymore. Now, Ice Trap has come up a couple of times here. Ice Trap is the one build that does overperform because of Heat Shiver. Not because it's tearing up the meta on PoE Ninja, just because it is the second best boss killer in the game behind the General's Cry builds. General's Cry is still better, but the problem with Ice Trap is not Heat Shiver. The problem with Ice Trap is that you can throw too many Ice Traps at once. Frostblades is another skill people are talking about, and there's also Physical Conversion, Tornado Shot. There's Cold Conversion, Tornado Shot, Cold Conversion, Blade Vortex. Cold Conversion, Blade Vortex, I think, is just competitive with other versions of Blade Vortex. Tornado Shot itself is overpowered and probably needs to be nerfed. And Frostblades, I think, is fine. Frostblades is one of the top 20 skills in the game, no question, but it's like one of only 3 melee skills in the top 20, so I'm fine with that. The top 20 skills melee-wise are, you have Bone Shatter quite high, you've got Glacial Hammer, and you've got Frostblades bringing up the bottom of it. So, all those things. Brittle is obsolete because of Heat Shiver. I agree with that, as Madoppler is saying in chat. There's a whole bunch of things that Heat Shiver is the best in-slot item for, but unless there are some fundamental changes that bring up cold skills to a level where they're, like, at least at the level that Wave of Conviction Ignite is, unless that happens, then I'm actually opposed to a Heat Shiver nerf. That said, my opinion doesn't matter. Grinding Gear Games make the decision, not me. So, we've talked about the third most likely item, in my opinion, to get a nerf, which is Heat Shiver. We've talked about the second most likely item to get a nerf, which is Taste of Hate. Let's talk about the real problem one. This is the other tier 3 rarity unique, the one that sees more play than Heat Shiver, and that is used on more builds, and that also sends a number of them into the stratosphere. Yes, Calm Spirit. This item is at a higher power level than Heat Shiver. It is so central to a lot of powerful interactions on builds. Now, Calm Spirit is in this weird spot where if it was only able to be used on melee builds, it would be a fine addition to the game. But it's being used by pretty much every Deadeye as well. And the Deadeye Ascendancy is overpowered at the moment, and Calm Spirit just takes it to the next level. As Madoppler's asking why I'm not talking about Lightning Coil here, I kind of feel that is Taste of Hate as well. So I guess I'm bundling those two together. But I feel like Taste of Hate's the more problematic of the two because Flask Effect scales it. So, Calm Spirit is one of those things that is just a tremendous damage multiplier, clear speed multiplier, and defense multiplier, all simultaneously, because it allows you to get a huge amount of uptime on Berserk. I don't think the item is fundamentally broken. I think the numbers on it are too good. So this is something that I think needs to be looked at. I really feel like this is something that if Grinding Gear Games can get it to the point that this can't be used with bows somehow, then I think it would be a good addition to the game because it would be something that makes melee more viable. But as long as it's being used by bows, it's just making bow builds better, and bow builds are in a position where they're kind of a bit over the top already. Okay, so let's jump on to the next thing that I think might be in line for a little bit of a look. And this is Strongboxes. Here we're talking, this is going to be very similar to when we were talking about Speaker of the Dead, the Keystone related to Torment. Strongboxes are fine as a mechanic. In fact, they're underpowered as a mechanic. It's the Strongbox monsters are enraged is something that is a huge loot multiplier for Magic Find groups. Now, the thing that happens when you have something that is a huge loot multiplier for top 1% players, and this is also the case with Speaker of the Dead, this is also the case with Sanctum for that matter, it ends up distorting the Trade League economy in various ways because the items that come from that content, from the content that can be done extremely efficiently if you've got access to that particular mechanic, that content ends up being way more lucrative than it otherwise would be. And that is something that's, that's extremely, that ends up giving those people increased buying power, which means they can pump up the prices of various items, just by virtue of throwing more currency at them. For example, I think if you were to nerf the Sanctum Divine Orb drops, then you would see a decrease in the cost of Mage Blood, a decrease in the cost of Awakened in Power. With Strongbox Enraged, though, it's a different dynamic. Grinding Gear Games have been changing the drop rates on Divination cards in particular to adjust for player behavior and players becoming more optimized. And the Monsters Are Enraged Sexton is one of the things that I think has caused the massive nerfs that have taken place in Tier 0 Divination card drop rates. The drop rate estimate for the Doctor in patch 3.18, the drop rate estimate was 32. The drop rate estimate is now 12. That change took place at the same time that Grinding Gear Games made more access to Divination Scarabs and as a response to players having more access to this sextant because of sextants being sealable. I think the numbers on it are just higher than they should be. So that's something that I think is big. And someone's asking in chat, like, what percentage of players are doing Magic Find groups? I think the percentage is low, but they are a large percentage. Like, not just a large percentage, an overwhelming majority of the Apothecary drops go to people who are doing this. And that ends up having a huge distorting effect on every player's experience in PathOfExile. In terms of other questions that are coming up, someone's asking, how much are March of the Legions early in the league? A poorly rolled March of the Legion will be very, very cheap because I think the item is tier 4 rarity now. I'd have to check that. Let me just confirm that for you. I just want to confirm that it is indeed a tier 3 rarity, and to do that without flashbanging everyone, because that's important. We don't want to flashbang everyone in chat. March of the Legion is a tier 5 rarity, confirmed to be tier 5 by Ritual. So, it is a tier 5 rarity unique, which means it is the equal most common unique in the game. You're going to have no problems picking up a March of the Legion early league, but remember that 2/3 of them are going to be either +3 or +4, and March of the Legion's primary appeal is to Varlet trying to get an extra +2 to your Mind Gems in it, which is something there. Yeah, I do think Velops has got a good point there that one guild has 90% of the listed for trade Hinekora locks. I don't think that TFT, and when I'm saying TFT here, I mean the guild, not the Discord server. I don't think they actually own 90% of the ones on the server. There's a lot of people who would own them, who would have them squirreled away, and who are taking them to standard. But in terms of the ones that are listed for trade, 90% of them are in the hands of a single guild, the ones that are listed. That's the thing that's really significant. The other factor is that I think PathOfExile players underestimate how good the average player is now. Or not necessarily the average player, but the average in-franchise player. It is the case that to be in the top 15,000 players by XP, by about day 4, you need to be level 95. So have a think. Are you someone who gets to level 95 by day 4? Most people, the answer is going to be no. Most people take about 25 to 35 hours of gameplay to reach that point, that level, maybe even more than that. And there are 15,000 players who are there. So there's a whole bunch of things there. Geix is asking about Ascendancy reworks. I think Assassin and Gladiator, it's their time. It is their time, I think. Someone's asking in chat, Killen Phillips is asking about maximizing Ritual in a solo self-found environment. Glacier map is the answer. Glacier map can often give you 9 extra unique monsters that can go into your Ritual vessel, but even then, it's not particularly great. I do think that the key thing, and Danny Holland is pointing this out in chat right now, that if you nerfed Magic Find groups at the moment, without any adjustment to the drop rates of the tier 0 Divination cards, then yes, this would massively make those cards rarer and make those items just much more inaccessible. The thing is that Grinding Gear Games have already nerfed the drop rates of the top Divination cards and the top unique items because of the prevalence of them. I think Grinding Gear Games probably have a target number for the amount of Mage Bloods they want to exist in a league, and every time they find that the number that does exist dramatically exceeds their expectations, then they start looking to drop the drop rate overall. Instead, I think they should be, instead of doing that, they should be nerfing the outlier Magic Find mechanics. Alrighty, let's just jump over to the next Ascendancy to discuss, and this is the Guardian, which was overhauled in 3.22. Now, with the Guardian, I do not think that this needs buffs or nerfs, particularly in the base game. However, there needs to be a section in the 3.23 patch notes that says Ruthless only Guardian nerfs, and the Guardian needs to be gutted in Ruthless. This is something that's not going to affect most players of the game, but in Ruthless, the Guardian is so much better than every other Ascendancy in the game that really it's the only viable one. There hasn't been an Ascendancy this dominant in the base game since patch 3.8 in Blight League, when the Necromancer was 40% of the ladder, or 3.7 Legion League when the Slayer was 49%, I believe. So that's going to be the sorts of things that I think need to be... That's something that I think needs to be a nerf that doesn't touch the base game. It is possible that they might decide the Sentinel of Radiance needs to be nerfed, not at endgame, but from level 33 through to about level 80, it could do with a nerf. It's perfectly fine at endgame. It's just that it's really good before then. Deadeye we talked about before, and that was something that I think is going to get nerfed in this patch. It's not a dominant Ascendancy, but it will be if it's not touched. It wasn't dominant in 322. We haven't had a truly dominant one. But one of the things that we can learn from the past in PathOfExile is that when there's a best Ascendancy and it's not nerfed, it ends up becoming dominant pretty quickly. Fate is asking about the Guardian, and is it an unpopular Ascendancy? Yeah, in the base game it doesn't need to be nerfed, except maybe for leveling. But Ruthless, it needs to be gutted. Sentinel of Radiance doesn't need a nerf at endgame, but levels 33 to maybe 75 actually is more accurate. That's where it could probably get nerfed. But then again, 75 is something you get to pretty quickly. So I don't think it's necessary. I think Guardian is fine in the base game overall. It's a reasonably good Ascendancy. It's one of the best Ascendancies for a new player to play. And it's a serviceable Ascendancy without being particularly great for a veteran player. Philip Nutrition is asking, what's my thoughts on Blade Vortex Occultist with Fizz to Cold conversion? My thoughts are, wait and see whether Heat Shiver survives the nerf bat or not. I made the case for not nerfing Heat Shiver before, but other players in chat disagreed with me, and I think Grinding Gear Games might disagree with me at some point. So, if Heat Shiver gets nerfed, don't play it. If Heat Shiver doesn't get nerfed, then maybe or maybe not play it. The key thing is Heat Shiver might have its rarity changed even if it's not nerfed. The final thing I had in my notes was Forbidden Sanctum, which we've already covered because I also put it in my other notes. What we want to do now is have a quick look at some of the things that are coming up in chat now. Someone is asking, do I think that Deadeye will be dead in Hardcore after potential nerfs? Yes, Deadeye is not an Ascendancy that's well suited to the specific hard mode of Hardcore. The Hardcore rule set is brutal on the Deadeye Ascendancy. It's just not suited to it, and currently the only reason that Deadeye is popular in Hardcore at all is because it's just so overpowered that it doesn't really matter, that it's poorly suited to the rule set. Kind of the same way that right now the Ruthless rule set is nasty in other ways and doesn't have that effect to the Guardian, means that the Guardian is just miles ahead of everything there. Remo is asking when the patch notes come out. We think they're going to be in about 12 hours. Peepapoo is mentioning that Heat Shiver isn't necessarily needed on Cold Blade Vortex. You can get a +1 power charge Heat Shiver as well. Something that people often forget is possible. And yeah, as for Sanctum, I do think Sanctum is going to get gutted because it was a huge contributor to how expensive high-end items were this league. What do I think will happen to Pathfinder or Toxic Rain, Lightning Arrow, Tornado Shot? Lightning Arrow and Tornado Shot will probably get nerfed. Toxic Rain, I think, is actually fine. Completely fine. Maybe even a bit underpowered. And Pathfinder is sort of tied up to some of the stuff around the... Taste of Hate. Divina is asking about General's Cry. Will that get buffed? I think the answer is that if General's Cry gets changed, it will be exactly the opposite of what you're wanting to see. General's Cry is the single best boss killing build at the moment. It's not a universally useful build. It's very much a single... If you want to make a build that excels in one thing is killing uber pinnacle bosses, then General's Cry is the best choice for you. And the second best choice is Ice Trap right now. Hexblast Mines as well. Like, there's a few options. Those are definitely there. Someone's asking, how much copium are they on for hoping for Ultimatum to return? I think that Ultimatum is very likely because I've heard a number of secondhand accounts that people had private conversations with developers at ExileCon, and that at ExileCon they said, yes, it is coming back very soon. And additionally, yeah, this is very soon for ExileCon. And on top of that, it's Chris Wilson's mentioned that in passing as well. Wouldn't be surprised that. Mist is asking, other than Mageblood and Headhunter, which other true chase items in the game? Stasis Prison has fallen off, but it's extremely valuable. Kalandra's Touch, Hateforge, and obviously the Mirror of Kalandra. I mean, when I talked about, people are chatting there about the prospect of numerical nerfs to Sanctum rewards. I mentioned that I think a 35% nerf in both Sanctum loot rewards and also in Sanctum tone drop rates would be appropriate, but that's just my opinion. Other people will think different things. I do think that if that's not done, then we're going to have a very bad inflation league. Just having a look if there's anything else. What do I think about the prospect of Spectre buffs? Ray Spectre is a skill that's caused too many problems. I don't think Grinding Gear Games are that unhappy with it being off meta at the moment. It's one of those skills where it's an enormous amount of work to balance Spectres against each other, so they generally balance the whole skill around the best Spectres, which means that naive use of Ray's Spectre tends to be really disappointing. So, and yeah, Jonix is also talking about that as well. I think it would take a tremendous amount of work to make Spectres both good, and also for Spectres to feel different to each other. And I think that's the sort of thing that Grinding Gear Games probably wouldn't do unless there was a huge amount of demand for it. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. Zhao Pao is asking about what was so good about Ultimatum. Ultimatum was it wasn't a super popular league at the time, but it was reasonably popular. It was a high octane in-map event that had natural pauses in it where you could even just get up and get a beer from the fridge between different rounds of these fights. It was just I think it was one of the best Breach-like leagues that Grinding Gear Games have ever done. Not everything about it was perfect, but I did like it a lot. Dark Pump is asking, is Deadeye the problem, or is Tornado Shot or Lightning Arrow the problem? I think it's a bit of both. I think that you don't want to gut any one of those three things. I think you want to give them all a haircut. Robust Style Bankruptcy is asking, do I think we'll see any changes to Impending Doom with the changes to Spell Cascade's functionality? So the Spell Cascade changes, for those of you that missed it earlier, Spell Cascade has something Grinding Gear Games have always considered a bug on it, where the interaction with Spell Cascade and any skill that grants increased flat AoE, so curses give a lot of it, they interact in an unexpected way, something that wasn't intended by Grinding Gear Games. This made Impending Doom in Vixen's Entrapment better than Grinding Gear Games had intended it to be. That said, this only made the skill reasonable. It didn't make it amazing. It just made it into something that was reasonably solid. So that's the question that's being asked there. And I've just lost my train of thought with that. It's yeah, I don't know. I think Impending Doom could use some numbers increases, given that these mechanical changes are happening. There's been a bit of a testing with it, and it would be cool to see. In terms of Ultimatum, more on Ultimatum, it had some tremendously good uniques. It was one of the best sets of uniques other than Sanctum that we've had. It had Mahoxidal's Machination, it had Hateforge, it had Relic of the Pact, which was a single build item, but incredibly build empowering. It's got Temptation Step, which is cheap and nasty these days, but does some pretty silly things. At least two of the versions of it do. And I think there's something else as well. Oh yeah, of course, Glimpse of Chaos. Glimpse of Chaos is one of the most interesting, weird items in the game. So I feel like every single unique from Ultimatum, unless I'm missing one that was bad, every single one of them had some uses to it. Interesting question there about unique maps that were changed recently. So a couple of leagues ago, you had this option on the Atlas that granted +2 to the zone level of a unique map, of every unique map that you put into the Atlas. And unique maps are just, generally speaking these days, they mostly do them once each. Coward's Trial is an exception. Coward's Trial, though, is a tier 3 rarity unique, so it's something that's not very accessible. And certainly not something people are grinding a lot. Coward's Trial is actually in a good spot loot-wise. Ober's Cursed Trove is like probably one of the better of the rest. So is Malkoon, but the rest of them are all pretty bad. I feel like the unique maps, like, I just like to see a bit of variance. I'd like to see some of the ones that have been focused on by challenges and by the Atlas for a while. I'd like to see them take a break and be replaced somewhere else. So there's a whole bunch of things like that. I don't like the idea of making unique maps rarer. I actually think that the Twilight Temple, the three that are rare, Twilight Temple, Coward's Trial, and one of the others, these are too rare as it is. And I kind of wouldn't mind them being twice as common. The ones that are not on the Atlas, though, I think they could swap around the Atlas ones. So keep all of the Grandmasters off the Atlas, but why not give Pillars of Odun a league off the Atlas and replace it with Beachhead for a league? I think that'd be an improvement. A couple other questions that are coming up. So details of the actual patch notes, probably 11 hours. 12 hours. 12 hours now. Patch notes are 13,000 words, apparently, I think, or 15,000, whatever it was, 13 or 15,000. I'd have to check that screenshot from Twitter. I don't have Twitter anymore, so someone posted in my Discord a link to the Twitter comment. This is slightly longer than the patch notes for 3.22, but it's also worth noting that 3.22 had 4,000 words dedicated to Ruthless as well. So those aren't relevant. Putrid Cloister, thank you, Amirius. Putrid Cloister is the other tier 3 rarity map that I couldn't think of. And yeah, I agree. Doriani's Machinarium, we need a break from that being a challenge. I don't mind it being a challenge sometimes. In fact, I always do well out of it because I casually delve a bit. I like delve content too much. So I like doing it for that reason. But Doriani's Machinarium is usually like really ridiculously expensive late league. That said, if Doriani's Machinarium goes away from the Atlas, then that basically removes an entire cluster of the passive tree, because the only reason that Kirak's comprehensive scouting reports exist is for Doriani's Machinarium. The Firebloom is saying that because the Control F search of the patch notes has been confirmed on Twitter by Grinding Ear Games to not have the word Sentinel in it, they think that Sentinel of Radiance is not being changed. I disagree. The node is called Radiant Crusade, I believe, and it's entirely possible that the wording could be Radiant Crusade has been reworked. It now treats your character as being 3 levels lower than it does in the normal game and 10 levels lower in Ruthless. It still caps out at level 85. Or whatever. There are a whole bunch of things. In terms of challenges that I consider to be a grind is being asked at the moment. I might start to wind up at this point, but I'll go through some of the questions here that are just being asked now. The grindiest challenges this league. There's the obvious ones. There's the one to do 1,000 map modifiers, 1,000 in-map events. There's another one that's out of 1,000. There's endgame grinds. Those ones are obvious. The Essence challenge. Oh my god, that was horrible. The Breach challenge is not insignificant. The Legion challenge, the Delirium challenge, all of those take a fair bit of grinding. And they all require grinding with a specific Atlas in mind. But the Essence one was the worst. Opened 75 Deafening Essences. That one took a long time. That was not super fast. Someone's saying, have I seen the PoE 2 Steam page? I have not. I'll have a look at that tomorrow morning, my local. Glorious Toast is asking, was Doriani's Machinarium made rarer from Kirak missions? Yes, it was. It used to be possible to get it as a white tier, yellow tier, or a red tier Kerak mission. It is now red tier exclusive, and so that's basically 3 times rarer than it was. That said, the cheapest way to get Doriani's Machinarium by far, and this is not even remotely close, that by far it is the stuff about, it is the comprehensive scouting reports. They are still the best way. Sheriff Rick's pointing out something with Empyrean's profit breakdown video. Yeah. I'm actually surprised that it's only 7.5 each from Empy's group. Like, Empy is one of the best min-maxes in the game, and I am honestly surprised that his group as a whole, like with 6 players, are only making 1.5 Mirror Shards an hour between them. I was thinking it'd be a lot more. What's my top 3 ideas, wildest ideas for things and changes in this patch? Okay, firstly, let's start with something that's not that wild, but that hasn't been done in a while. What about new maps? We haven't had new maps in a long time, and they're just interesting. So that's the first thing. Second thing, this is not speculating that this is going to happen. This is just speculating on things that could be interesting. A massive overhaul of Divination card drop locations. A massive transformation of where they are. Third, this is something out of left field, but that I think would be an improvement from the game. Remove weapon enchantments from Heist and give them to Maven 10 ways instead. So that's a few things there. Anyways, what I think I might do here is, I wasn't intending this to be a super long, super in-depth stream. This is basically a little bit of a test run. One question I want to ask. I have had one of YouTube's new ad settings on. Can people give me a sense in chat? Can you answer A, if the ads have been overwhelmingly annoying, like if they've just been off the charts infuriating? B, if they have been a slight irritation but tolerable? And C, if you've not noticed them. Let's just get a sense as to how they've been, because I want to know, because YouTube have changed everything when it comes to ads and streams. And I want to know whether I've got the settings wrong or not. Missed has seen exactly 0 ads, that's fine. Adblock has killed all ads, that's fine too. Okay, what I'm getting here is that they are not infuriating anyone. That's good. That means I'll use this setting in the future. 2 ads in 30 minutes. That's okay. I can live with that. So all of that is fine. I'm not having any problems there. The reason I ask this is that YouTube gives me 3 settings I can choose between on the ads, and I think what I'm hearing from people is that they're tolerable, or that you've got no ads for various reasons. Like, honestly, I don't care about ad block. Because I find people who use ad block, the most detrimental thing for me as a content creator is not someone not seeing ads. It's someone watching 2 seconds of a video then closing it. That tells YouTube to suppress the video if it's done a lot. Will Righteous Fire get nerfed is another thing from Stefan. I think Righteous Fire is in this weird spot where it's a strong skill, but it's not an overpowered skill. The reason that it performs so well is that it is just so well understood by the player base, so well documented that, and there is a phenomenal guide, absolutely phenomenal guide from Pox to it. There's a whole bunch of other variants of it. Basically, the player base understands Righteous Fire, I would argue probably better than any other skill in the game. And that is, that's a good spot. Anyways, thanks for all the feedback as far as the ad stuff goes. It's not toxic. That's good to know. But yeah, as long as Pox updates good guides, players who don't feel confident to pick something else can play Righteous Fire. I think Righteous Fire is in a fine place power-wise at the moment. And it's, I mean, I've been playing it this league. Granted, I played Searing Bond instead of Fire Trap because I wanted to test that skill out. Searing Bond would actually be stronger, but I think it's fine. And yeah, if it is the case that, like, if... I feel like there's a number of skills that are in a reasonable place at the moment where if someone tried to popularize them, they're good enough that they could be popularized if there was as much knowledge. Anyways, thank you all for tuning in. The big thing that's going to be happening is going to be the live stream. About 10 hours from now, I'm going to go live on Twitch. That's 23 minutes before the start of the stream, would be 10 hours from now. That is when we're going to be talking about everything that actually gets announced. After that, my plans are that I'm going to do the Twitch stream while the Twitch exclusive promotion is on with the free wings. And after that, we'll then jump over to YouTube and we'll go through all the patch notes, assuming we get them. If we don't get the patch notes, we'll go through what we actually have. After that, I want to then, over this weekend, maybe even within a few hours of the live stream on YouTube ending, my plan then is to then come up with a video that is a much more condensed version of the patch notes discussion. MH, I'm saying 23 minutes because it's 9:07 my local, so plus 10 hours is 7:07, and the stream starts at 7:30. So it's just based on the current time, not me planning on starting exactly that time. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and I will see you, well, when I say tomorrow morning, I will see you when we've got the live stream, when the patch notes are out, and we'll go through all of that. And at that point, I'll be able to answer some of these questions about what my league start plan is.